Good afternoon, everybody. These are Charter Moms Chats. I am Inga Cotton. I'm the founder and executive director of San Antonio Charter Moms, and we've been going online to connect with our online community and help parents learn about how to navigate school choice and how to make the best of distance learning and having fun while still social distancing. And today, I'm so excited. We have a guest. We have Starlee Coleman, who's the CEO of the Texas Public Charter Schools Association. And in a parallel universe, we would be hanging out at the Texas Charter Schools Conference and having a grand old time. Because I remember last year that conference was a really exceptional event. But this year we're being creative and we're reaching audiences virtually. So let's see. Starlee has been working on education reform issues for over 20 years. He has a 3-year-old daughter. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. 3 years old today. Yeah. Today's her birthday.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I hope you have some fun stuff planned. And you have a fur baby too. Is that a dog?
Yep, a fur baby dog, a rescue pup. She's 5, so she's the big sister.
Cool. Okay. And so Starlee is joining us from Austin, Texas, where the Texas Public Charter Schools Association is headquartered. So there is the name and there is the website. So I encourage you to go check them out. So now the purpose today is, so Starlee is an expert in all things Texas charter schools, and she has a beautiful set of slides that I'm going to bring in. And the goal is to educate our audience about public charter schools in Texas. And so we're going to go through these slides. And if you're watching this live and you want to leave a comment, I can introduce those questions to Starlee as well. And so, yeah, I'm just really thankful to have the expert here. So Starlee, let's start with what is the definition of a charter school? So let's see, let me go to the next slide. Okay. All right. So yeah, there's all kinds of myths about it, but this is just the straight truth here. What is a charter school?
Yeah, thanks for asking that, Inga, and thanks for having me on. I'm not nearly the expert that you are. Obviously, charter moms, and you, the actual boss of the charter moms. You have lots of hands-on experience, of course, but. We hear a lot of questions, and it's remarkable to me that even in place in Texas for 25 years, we still get lots of questions about what exactly a charter school is. Is it a public school? Is it a private school? People just don't really know how they operate. So charter schools are public schools. They're funded by the state government. They're overseen by the state government. They're free. And open to all students who want to attend with no exceptions. And they are, charter schools are students are required to take the same state test that ISD kids take. We have to meet the same graduation requirements and all of that stuff. The thing that makes a charter school different is our board. Charter schools are run by nonprofit organizations, and their boards are appointed by those nonprofit organizations. And the vision for why charter schools were adopted in Texas 25 years ago was this idea that kids who had been struggling for a long time in district schools, low-income kids, children of color, students with special needs, that they needed an alternative outside of our traditional district system. Because sometimes district systems just get so big that it's really hard for them to respond to individual student needs, right? And that's not a knock on them, it's just the way that they're built and structured. And so having charter schools as complements inside the district system to help, pick up the slack where a district can't meet it is really the point of a charter school.
Yeah. That's a great, I think what's important about this chart is showing what's so similar about the charter schools and, what they have in common with all public schools, right? That, they're open to all students. There's no tests or financial barriers that are going to keep them out. That the money is coming from the state of Texas. And then I guess, let's see, let me move to the next slide because there's even more detail about, oh wait, oops, I got out of order. Okay. Yeah, well, no, let's talk about like who are the students who are going to the charter schools, because in a lot of ways it looks a lot like the kids who are going to the traditional public schools.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at this chart there on the left side of the chart, you'll see just this sort of overall state demographic breakdown of kids in charters today. So obviously, you can see that the kids coming into charters are, sort of generally from traditionally underserved backgrounds. This, of course, is not all schools. There are schools certainly charter schools that locate in suburban areas where they just don't have as many African American or Hispanic students. But this generally is the picture overall of charter school students in Texas. And then on the right side of the chart, just numbers, how many kids, there's, just under 320,000 kids in charters this school year, 761 campuses. This is our 24th year of having charter schools in Texas. So I'm starting to build up a pretty good track record that we will, of course, get into here in a minute. One thing I do want to acknowledge here, so you'll see, charter schools are the orange bar, and you'll see that there's one category of students where charter schools don't have the same number, and that's special education students. So we hear a lot of questions about this, right? Why might that be? Why aren't special needs students coming to charters at the same rate that they're attending ISDs? So we took a look at this this summer, did a deep dive into the data there to try to figure out what was driving that difference. And what we found was that charters in Texas, the way that a charter works is that a charter school is its own school district, right? So think about San Antonio ISD and Northeast ISD and Northside ISD and all the ISDs, right, in San Antonio. And charter schools are additional school districts alongside those ISDs. So and charter districts tend to be quite small, right? Like think about some of the charters in San Antonio that that your Facebook fans might know, like Compass Rose, right? They're only a couple hundred kids, right? I mean, what are they at this year? Maybe 600 or 700 kids.
So they opened another campus. So they pretty much doubled in size. They pulled a fast one on you, Starlee. But
okay, they did. So even if they're 1,500, right? Even if they're 1,500 kids, that's a really small school district, 1,500 kids, right? Yeah. So think about that. So just keep in mind that the scale that charter schools are operating on is generally much smaller than ISDs. So if you think about that, and what we looked at, one of the things that we looked at when we were looking at this special education data was that our numbers, charter school numbers, actually look exactly the same as small ISDs, right? So small ISDs have a slightly lower percentage than the statewide average of special needs kids, and small charters also have a slightly lower percentage of special needs kids. And one of the things that told us when we started digging into the data about in the large districts where they do have the higher percentage of special needs kids, what we were able to see was that the special needs categories that students, where they are like have a significantly higher enrollment, it's those really, really acute, very significant special needs categories. So kids who are very seriously physically disabled, or very seriously mentally or intellectually disabled. And what we were able to isolate is that those families are locating in large urban areas, in large urban districts, likely because they have access to specialized medical care. So our numbers overall look just the same as ISDs that are the same size as charters. So that I feel like it's really important for us to talk about that, because I feel like that's one of the criticisms that comes up about charters a lot, that people just don't understand, and they wonder, like, are we doing something that is disincentivizing special needs parents to come to charters, or are we not meeting our federal and state obligations to serve those students? Like, what's driving that? So we felt like it was really important for us to get to the bottom of that and try to understand if there was something that we needed to be aware of. But what we found was that our school size just tends to be the sort of the factor that we can isolate.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, that's I encourage. I mean, I've really been impressed over the last year or two with like the studies that have come out that y'all have commissioned. Because it answers these questions that people have been asking. That right.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we want to know. Let's go look at the data, right? And it really is like a comfort level that the charter school sector is always working better, and taking its responsibilities seriously.
Yeah, and I feel the same, right? Like I was born here in Texas, but have been away for a long time and came back 2 years ago to take this job. And I feel like for me, it's really important for me to know whether or not there's a nugget of truth in some of the criticisms that I hear about charter schools, right? So I have taken it upon myself to staff up my organization with a team of researchers who can answer the questions, right? And if and when we find stuff that is concerning, believe me, we're on it, right? Because the last thing, right, that I want is schools that are not doing what they need to do. I want all of our schools to be awesome, because that just continues to tell such a great story about charters and the value of charters in the public education landscape. So, there's no incentive for us to like not know if something nefarious is happening, right? It's the opposite. Like we want to know. So
right.
we are
Find
glad
it and fix it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I've noticed that we do have a lot of discussions in the Charter Moms discussion group. And actually, I'm gonna pop the banner up. So this is if you're not already a member, viewers, please join the San Antonio Charter Moms discussion group on Facebook. And a topic that comes up a lot is like new members will join and they'll say, hey, we're moving to San Antonio, or we just got this diagnosis, my child has ADHD. What's a charter school that does a good job of addressing the needs of kids with ADHD? And special needs can be a motivator of why a family might change schools. Like if whether it's within their ISD or moving from an ISD to a charter, or switching to homeschooling, that like trying to find that right fit. And that's what's, I think, part of what's so exciting to me about charter schools is that, that you talked about how they're, they have their own boards, they're private nonprofits that, are managing them, with public money. But there's a vision, right? There's a purpose, like offering a different education model. And by having that range of education models out there, it's giving families choices so that they can find a place where their kids can thrive. The challenge is getting the information out, and that's where SA Charter Moms comes in, and that's right. Texas Charter Schools Association presents like the data, right? it makes the world more complicated, but if you can find the right fit, it's really a wonderful thing for families.
I totally agree. But don't you think there's an interesting like generational shift that's happened, right? Because Inga, you and I are the same age, and like my parents, it never really would have occurred to them to like shop for a school for me. And now it never would occur to me to not shop for a school for my kid, right? So like I think I think that's what's amazing too about charters, and frankly what's so great and neat about what's happening inside San Antonio ISD too, right? Like I love the vision of each campus having some sort of specialized program. Like that's we get like irrationally attached to old things, right? Like the way that things have always been done or whatever, right? And I feel like we as Americans have like, frankly, a really irrational attachment to like the old way that we used to do schools, right? The way that we grew up with schools and the way that we were assigned to a school and the school, that school in our neighborhood. There's a ton of value in like some of the things that happen in that, but like what we need a system of schools where every kid is in a building every day or online, whatever floats your boat as a parent. I definitely am sending my kid to a building where they're in a setting that is going to like spark their love of learning, right? Where they're going to come home from school every day and go, wow, that was so awesome. That was a good day, right? That's what we want. And that is not the same place for every kid. It's just not, right? So making sure that families have that flexibility to find the place that's going to spark their kid is what we should be shooting for. And like that means that transformation happens. But the thing too, I guess to just keep in mind about like the sort of fear factor I think that comes along with like, well, gosh, if we just stop doing things the way that we've always done them, like what's going to happen? What's going to happen to neighborhood schools? And the answer to that is what's happening in San Antonio. They will evolve, and they will evolve into something that's really cool and responsive to parents and unique for a neighborhood and valuable to a community. So I think if we can divorce ourselves from from our attachment to something that used to be, then it also frees up the school leaders to be innovative too, right? We keep them boxed in a way that is unhelpful to them and unhelpful to kids. So we have to be the ones, the grown-ups have to be the ones to just wrap their brain around the need for change.
Right. That invite all different school leaders and district leaders to participate in the innovation and making their schools more unique and more responsive to what their neighborhoods and the families who are in their schools are needing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Hey, we had a question pop up that's actually a really good transition to the next slide. So John is asking, he says, last year legislators approved increasing funding to charter schools. Did that increase ever take place? So let me go pop over to the next slide, and then we can talk about school finance, because this is a target-rich environment for for questions and also kind of misinformation about. So I don't know if you want to talk about the slide or if you want to address John's question about what happened in the last legislative session.
Great. Okay, let's do both. So in the last legislative session, lawmakers did pass a big bill that increased funding for all public schools, including charters. So that came in the form of just general, formula increases specifically aimed at low-income kids or kids from historically disadvantaged backgrounds. And then also those big teacher bonuses, the teacher incentive allotment, that was part of that package. So yes, charters were also the recipient of those HB3 funds. So here is the deal. This slide shows you where we stand state average, right? So these numbers are state average, all in for charters, all in for ISDs. This is the difference between charters and ISDs. I hear so much confusion about how charter schools are funded. And I hear all the time, well, charter schools get more money than ISDs, so of course you're doing well. Nope. Charter schools have right now today a delta of about $700 per student compared to the ISD school down the street. Charter schools do receive more money from the state because it's the only money we receive. Charters do not receive any of the local property tax money. So for ISDs, that makes up a really big chunk of their budget. Now, a big part of HB3's goal was to even that out a little bit, right? People have heard over and over again from local governments and from teachers and parents that they don't want property taxes to be such a heavy contributor to school funding. They want that to be more like half and half for the state. So when HB3 came along, they did dump a whole lot more money into ISDs because they were trying to get sort of right size how the state and local property taxes sort of match up to do the school funding. So charters do not receive more money overall than charters who do receive slightly more per student from the state because it's the only money we receive.
Right. I feel like I need to get that as a bumper sticker or something, because it.
Yeah, me too.
I need a stamp that I can just stamp on things. It's because of saying it over and over again. It's hard.
It's the number one question we get. And I will say that Texas school finance is uniquely complicated. So that's all. That just adds to the frustration because it's really hard to explain how our schools are funded otherwise. We have another chart that I think I've sent it to you, and I'll see if we have it in a GIF or something that you can post on the site. But it's just a little graph that shows incoming to charters and incoming to ISDs, what the pots of money are, and it just shows you really clearly that ISDs have 3 or 4 more pipes flowing in, right, that fill up their coffers. So anyway, it's a helpful graphic to just get a sort of big picture snapshot of how school funding works in Texas.
Yeah. But this lays it out very clear, right? There's the 2 backpacks there, And yes, there's a gap of per student funding that the students in the ISDs are getting slightly more money than the charter school students, even though the state share is larger for charter schools because that's all they get, whereas the local ISDs have taxing authority, right? Anybody who owns a home sees on their property tax statement, the amount of money that goes to the ISDs, right? And then it all gets shuffled around because, like you said, Texas school finance is very complicated. But HB2 tried to make it kind of level the playing field between the property-rich districts and the districts with lower property values, and it's complicated.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just like an ongoing, like ever evolving quest that lawmakers are on because, property rich districts like Austin, for example, it just keeps getting worse, right? Like the gap, between the districts surrounding Austin, it just keeps getting worse as Austin grows. So it's it's an ever moving target.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so I'm going to set up the next slide. So the next slide is talking about how charter schools prepare kids for the workforce. Let's see, there we go. Okay, yeah. So this slide has a lot of good news. This is exciting to me. So.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna zoom through this. There's three main things that if I could pick like three takeaways for people who are watching today, these are the three takeaways I want you to have. Number one, we talked about this in the intro. Charter schools are complements to ISDs, right? Even though we're growing and things are going really well, there's only 7% of the kids in Texas are at charter schools. No one envisions charter schools as some kind of replacement strategy for ISDs, right? That's not happening. No one's talking about that. No one envisions that. So we are a complement. We're a complement. That's number one. Number two is this slide. Public charter schools are preparing the workforce of the future. Let me run through a little bit of this data. But here's the third thing I want people to remember. Charter schools are accountable to taxpayers. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail in another slide or two. All right, so let's talk about preparing workforce of the future. 2/3 of the top rated districts in the state are charter districts, even though, as I just mentioned, we only have about 7% of the kids in the state. So we're significantly overrepresented in those top performing districts. And here's what's awesome about that. Remember back to the slide that I showed you in the beginning of like demographically who we serve. So we are largely serving historically disadvantaged kids and getting them into a place where we are overrepresented in the top performing district. That's awesome. Like that is such exciting news. And you can see how that's happening here on this slide. Twice as many ELL students are mastering English. That's huge. ELL students cannot succeed in school if they can't read in English. So getting them to a place where they're not only proficient, but actually have mastery of English is really, really important. Black students at charters are outperforming in every subject at every grade level. A higher percentage of charter schools are graduating with AP and IB credit. That's a huge predictor for college enrollment, and it also gives them a leg up on that first year in college. And this last bullet point is also really important for people to understand about charter schools. 10% of the kids in charter schools, 10%, so that's about 30,000 kids in charter schools today, have been previous high school dropouts. And charter schools are able to specialize in programs that bring those kids back into the public education space, get them ready, like back up to speed, get them the credits that they need to graduate from high school. And many of those schools that specialize in dropout recovery programs also have a workforce training component attached to that. So not only are these kids coming out of high school after they've dropped out, and some of them have been on the streets and all kinds of horrifying stories that you would hear. I mean, it's like the nightmare scenario for parents, right? We are bringing those kids back in, we are getting them through high school, and we're getting them some job training so that they're ready for the workforce. That's a really, really big part. 10% of our kids, right? That's a big part of the charter community in Texas.
Yeah, those are, I mean, the data is compelling, but all of these point to changing lives, right? Of like, instead of a child being stuck, only in their native language and not being able to be conversant in English, that's liberating, right? And when Black students can become excellent readers, it just opens the world to them, right? And when dropouts get a second chance and can get trained up for a job, like that changes the course of someone's life, to have access to specialized skills in the workforce. So that's really inspiring. Those are the success stories about charter schools, and they're not isolated. It's across the sector.
Right.
Okay, so next slide. So this slide is about college readiness.
Yes, college readiness. So one of the things that's, I think probably all of your folks probably know, the state has set some really ambitious goals that by 2030, 60% of the kids coming out of high schools in Texas will complete college, so have or some kind of post-secondary accreditation somehow, right? Our 60 by 30 goals. The state overall not on target today to meet those goals, which is not great. That is not great, right? Because the economy in Texas is changing really fast, and most of the jobs, like the jobs that are going to be middle-class jobs in the future, are going to require some kind of post-secondary certification. So we have got to get our kids ready for the new world. Charter schools are doing their part here to contribute to the state's effort. Overall, students generally graduating from charter schools are going on to college at higher rates and finishing college at higher rates too. And then when you look at this sort of specific demographic groups that we track, you'll see that in some cases, especially those bottom two, we have a significantly higher percentage of kids coming out of charters who are in these two categories who are going on to college, and those are really remarkable stats. So we're really proud of that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so there's an and what's so inspiring about this next slide is like the success isn't just limited to the children who actually attend campus at one of the charter schools. Like it actually has additional effects. This is where it's so great that you guys do all this research, because you're telling these, like it's like it goes from being a what if question to being like, now we know, right?
Yes.
That there's what have we learned about the effect that charter schools have on the surrounding traditional public school districts?
Yeah, this is like the most important slide for sure in the entire slide deck. It's easy for people to wonder if the academic success that charters are having is coming at the expense of ISDs, right? Like, do we do well and ISDs suffer? We've looked at 25 years of data, and the answer is unequivocally no. In fact, as charters have grown, ISDs have gotten better too, right? So it's this complementary nature that I was talking about before. ISDs with charters inside their attendance zones are doing better than ISDs without charters in their attendance zones. So look, 25 years ago when the legislature was debating creating charter schools, this was what they promised. The folks that were supporting charter schools, and that was a push led by Democrats at the time. And they said, look, this is going to, throw a lifeline to kids that need one, but it's also going to make districts better, right? It's gonna make everybody do better. It's going to create a win-win for kids. And 25 years later, we've got the data to show that it is.
That's really exciting.
It is really.
Yeah. Okay, so this is I might need to blow up this slide a little bit. So I'm going to take our heads off, but people can still hear us. Okay. This is really big. Okay.
Yes, there's a lot of words on this slide, but this goes to my third point that I wanted people to remember, that charter schools are accountable to taxpayers. So you can see in our fun, funky shaped Venn diagram here, in the middle are all of the laws that apply to charter schools and ISDs equally. So that's things like public meetings, open meetings, public records law. Our boards have to go through similar training programs. We're all audited by the state. All of the kind of stuff that is designed to protect taxpayers, right, and make sure that that people who run programs for the government or ISDs or the local health department, we all have to follow these same kind of rules, because the idea is that if you're getting taxpayer money, you have to be transparent about how that money is being spent, so that lawmakers can hold you accountable if something happens. So we are subject to those same laws, just like every other government entity is in the state. There's no difference. And in fact, there are several laws that apply to charter schools more stringently than ISDs. So we have to meet a really high bar of accountability before we can grow or expand. And we are happy to make that bargain, of course. But that's one of the things that's really important to me, that people walk away understanding that we're not just like out here running amok with no accountability, that there's lots and lots of oversight of charter schools, which is why, when you hear about a scandalous story that comes out of a charter school, it's a surprise, right? Because there is so much oversight. And it's frankly why it just doesn't happen that often, because there's lots of people looking over the shoulders of the educators running charter schools.
Yeah, like when I read things in the media, read things about politicians making claims like, well, the system would be fair if charter schools were held accountable. And I'm like, wait, what? What are you talking about? They are held accountable. There's all this stuff they have to jump through, right? And then there's, I guess, if I can go to the next slide, like there's stuff that charter schools meet that are even stricter than what traditional public schools have to deal with.
Yeah, so Texas is one of only 2 states in the entire country that has a law as strict as our accountability law. So charter schools get A through F ratings, just like ISDs. So both our individual campuses and our districts overall are rated on the same scale as ISDs. If we have a charter school that fails for 3 years in a row, and that could be a combination of failing academically or financially, whichever, 3 school years in a row and you're done in Texas. There's no exception to that policy. The Commissioner of Education has no discretion. There's no appeals process. It's just finished for you. And that is really, that's a really, really strict standard. And look, when that law first was passed and we got to the threshold of 3 years, there were about 30 charter schools that got shut down. They had been failing kids for a long time, and that was it, right? And to contrast that now, just a couple of years later, there wasn't even one charter school that was at risk of closure this last school year, right? The folks that weren't cutting it are out. So I that's one of the things that's really important for people to understand too. Like, a bad charter school does not linger in Texas. So like if you have stories about Ohio or Michigan or some other place, like just know that it is not the same here. It is really, really tough. It is a very tough standard for charters.
Yeah, I remember. So the blog started in 2012, and so I watched a few years where there were school closures every year here in San Antonio, or some where they got sort of merged or taken over by a different operator, and then things got cleaned up, and now it's cleaned up, right?
Wow.
And I think that every family can have an assurance that the charter schools have met these high standards for years, and that's how they're able to do it. Whereas there are still F-rated schools and ISDs that are still kind of in a turnaround process, or they haven't run out of chances yet. So you have to kind of have buyer beware, and look at the letter grade ratings. Letter grade ratings, not the whole story, but it's definitely something that more families need to be aware of about what's going on in their neighborhood school.
Yeah. And look, there's one extra layer of complexity for charters here, and that is we have to be rated as C, A, B, or C, or higher, right? An A, B, or C, in order to even grow, right? So when you think about like what that means, there are all kinds of ISDs that are rated C, D, and F, who kids come year after year after year after year after year, and they are allowed to continue to serve those kids. Now, is that doing those kids a favor? Probably not, right? If you can't educate the kids, that are already in your system, like bringing more kids in is, probably not the best idea. So people, should know that too about charters, that if we're not, in that top level of achievement, we can't even bring new kids onto our campuses the following school year. It's like a big deal. So for anyone who thinks that that nobody's watching, believe me, people are watching. And there's a lot of requirements that charters have to meet in Texas. in order to keep their doors open. And look, that's why our results are great, right? Because if you're not up to snuff, you're done, and that's okay, right? Look, we should be offering families options, but those options should be excellent, right, for every kid. And that's what we're getting to the place in Texas where where charter schools, you can be sure that when a charter school comes to your neighborhood, it's going to be an excellent option.
Yeah. And so this slide is about schools that have to close when they are struggling. And then this slide is about how rigorous it is, the process before a new charter school can open. So Can you tell us about this slide?
Yes. Okay. I bet some of your Facebook friends were watching the SBOE process a couple of weeks ago when they considered new charter applications. A couple new schools have applied from the San Antonio area. And man, that debate was crazy. So they had 3 hours of public testimony on the day that the state board made its decisions about which schools were going to be allowed to open. And I will say, before I get into these numbers, I will say this. That day was really interesting because everybody, I'm not exaggerating, everybody who talked on behalf of the charter school applicants talked about kids and families, and everybody who talked in opposition to the charter school applicants talked about money, right? This is not about money. And if we make it about money and not kids and families, then we are going to keep kids trapped in schools that are not working. And that is not our job, right? Our job as the adults in the room here and as voters and taxpayers is to demand that every kid have access to a great school. Keeping great options from families over a concern that is unfounded completely is just really criminal. Anyway, back to this slide. So, and I know I'm preaching to the choir there a little bit.
We both testified that day, but you were like very early in it, and you did a great job. And then I was in later, but I was trying to speak like on behalf of like all the families I talked to in San Antonio. Like they're asking like, what are the new schools coming? What are the new schools, right? And thankfully, Royal Public Schools and Prelude Prep both got their charters approved. So yay!
Yeah. That was just a wild ride over those couple of days. So here's the thing for people to understand about the charter application process in Texas. There's a national organization called the National Association of Charter School Authorizers. So this is like the policy group for all of the organizations around the country that authorize charter schools. And one of the things that they do is like try to create like a set of standards that authorizers are looking for when they're evaluating new applications. So NACSA is the how you say their acronym. NACSA has said that Texas has the most rigorous vetting process in the entire country for new charters. If you look at these numbers, you will see it is very hard to get a charter here in Texas. It hasn't always been that way. We definitely had a period of time where it was probably a little too easy to get a charter in Texas, which, you know how that goes, right? The pendulum sort of swings. We have definitely corrected from that point in time. And it is really hard, right? The bottom line is that 4 out of 5 charter applications are denied during the vetting process. So the idea, that schools like that, anybody who applies for a charter just like gets one and they're like handing them out like candy and then like, all this money and, whatever, like that is not the story. That is not the story. The story is that, that you can be sure that by the time an applicant makes it through the vetting process at TEA and then also makes it through the political approval process at the SBOE, that it is going to be a darn good addition to your community. It has been vetted. The leaders have been vetted. The curriculum has been vetted. This is going to be a great school. So you can feel confident in that. No fly-by-nights are happening. No shenanigans. This is, with the schools that are emerging out of this process are really, really terrific schools.
Yeah, which is like we talked about in the group, parents they're curious and they're excited about the new schools, but but it's a really important decision if you're going to entrust your children, to a campus run by these folks. Like you want assurances that these are well-trained people, thoughtful, and they're bringing something new to the education landscape. And that's the case for every new charter school that I've seen come to San Antonio while I've been watching this. Is that right? It's this very rigorous process, but at the end point, like when these schools actually open, they are very special places, and the kids who get to go there are really lucky to have that opportunity.
Yeah. I feel like San Antonio, with the combination of all of the things that all the organizations and all the things that you have going on in San Antonio is really doing an incredible job of recruiting like really exceptional educators to come to your community and open new schools. And that is super exciting to watch from here as well.
Yeah, it's been a real transformation. I remember it was much harder to get a seat at a good charter school 10 years ago than how it is now. There's just a lot more things to choose from, and you don't have to drive as far, and it's not as limited to just a few grade levels. I mean, it's a much broader education landscape, which has really been important, I think, with the pandemic and lots of people having to change and try to find the right fit. That we need options more than ever. Okay, so that was. Definitely. That was the last slide, right? Okay. Yes. Actually, so I'm wondering, Starlee, can you kind of recap what were the kind of three takeaways, the three things that
charter schools are complements to ISDs. We are here to help pick up the slack, right? Fill a gap. That's our job. Second, charter schools are preparing the workforce of the future. And the third thing is that charter schools are accountable to taxpayers.
Yeah, those are okay. I sometimes I get so close to this stuff, and I get excited about little details, and that it's really helpful, that you have this role of so many different charter leaders and and experts, and but you also have a vision about what the sector can be, right, and what role it can play in the state, and how it can help families, and how it can help businesses, and how it can help communities. And so that's I really appreciate how you're bringing that perspective, and this will help me to kind of simplify it, because I just want all the facts, I want all the data, right? And I miss going on school tours. That's one of the things I really miss.
Oh my gosh,
about because I can't. I like seeing the kindergartner sitting in a circle with the teacher, and seeing that connection that they have, and I love seeing student art on the walls, and I love watching the robots go down the hallways. And
yeah. I went to a school last week. I was in Fort Worth, my first business trip since March, and I went to Fort Worth for a couple of days. And I went to one of our schools in Fort Worth, and I was so excited that they were going to let me come to campus. And then I got there, and then it occurred to me, oh yeah, none of the kids are here. That's why they're letting me come. So it was great. And I loved chatting with the school leaders. That was really fun. But I really, really was excited to see the kids. So yeah, that's a bummer.
Yeah. But even while people are adapting to coronavirus, these truths are still there, right? That, the charter schools are filling niches that ISDs aren't necessarily serving, right? And that's why the families are choosing those schools, by offering something different. And right, like you said about the workforce readiness, right, of showing how many kids are coming out of charter schools, enrolling in college, and including especially the underserved populations, right, like English learners, African American kids, special ed kids like my son has special needs. And I didn't like that 25% number.
Scary, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, that shows, I think my experience with my son in charter schools is that they've had a very high experience for him, and that they, just because he has the label special education, that they're not going to give up on him, and they still expect him to graduate and go on to college and do really cool stuff. And I hear he's not unique. There's lots of stories like that of families who their kids in a charter school, and then they a new horizon opens up for them with higher expectations and a bright future.
Yep. Yeah, I mean that's major, right? Kids will meet the expectations that you set for them. They will. And so much of this, especially for kids, right, who come from families where their parents, right, can't even wrap their own brains around what it would be like, to go to college, or go to graduate school or whatever, right? It is so important that someone in that kid's life is setting that expectation for them and letting them vision cast, right, and help them. And that's such a big part of what charter schools are doing for low income children in particular, is showing them that there is a path, and then clearing obstacles out of their way, right, so that they can get there.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess my ask for the charter moms community is go to the Texas Charter Schools website, and there's a way that you can sign up to get updates, to be an advocate and stay informed about what's happening, so that you can beat back some of these myths, right? Like this myth that charter schools, because they're getting more funding from the state, that doesn't necessarily mean they're getting more funding per student. They're actually getting less because they're not getting the local funds, right? And this myth that the charter schools are somehow less accountable than ISDs. They're actually more accountable, right? They only have 3 years to mess up and then they get closed down. So so my ask, if viewers, charter moms, members, go to the Texas Charter Schools website and send those updates, because it's an ongoing challenge to protect these great schools that we have and to allow them to continue to grow and to open new campuses. Because there's just, when it's like you said, when it's about money and this sort of zero-sum mentality, that's destructive, right? It needs to be thinking about children and how we can help as many children as possible succeed and be ready for great jobs and to live lives full of choice.
Completely. Well, Inga, thank you for everything you do too. You're such a gem. And we are extremely lucky to have you in Texas. I know I've told you this before, I wish I could clone you in every one of our cities where we have charter schools. It would be amazing. So thank you very much for being such a great leader of moms. We're grateful.
Thank you. Well, thank you for being on Charter Moms Chats. And I look forward to being able to tour more schools and go to conferences and, be able to have a drink with you and debrief and someday.
Me too. Yeah. I will look forward to that very much.
Okay. Thank you so much, Starlee, for giving us the Charters 101.
Have a great afternoon.
All right.
Bye.
All right. Bye.